5 great scientists who were ridiculed during their lifetimes. Ludwig Boltzmann hanged himself because no one believed his theory. Ignaz Semmelweis ended up in an asylum for suggesting doctors should wash their hands. Aristarchus was almost jailed for saying that the Earth orbits the Sun, and there's more. 1. Gregor Mendel was ignored his entire life. The man who founded the science of genetics led an unimpressive lifestyle. As a child, he skipped school. Then he devoted his life to serving as abbot of a monastery. Mendel also maintained an experimental garden. He spent 7 years of his life there. Mendel studied the selection and crossbreeding of peas. His findings became known as Mendel's laws of inheritance. In 1866, he published them in a scientific journal. Not a soul was interested. Then, Mendel sent copies of his theory to reputable scientists. They didn't respond. 2. Ignaz Semmelweis's life-saving discovery drove him to his grave. In 1847, the Hungarian scientist was running 2 maternity clinics. One was partly an educational facility. The students studied both childbirth and autopsies. Another clinic was for low-income women, yet it was popular with all social classes. The reason for this was the death rate in the first clinic. Even women who gave birth on the street had a better chance of surviving. It was Semmelweis who got to the bottom of it. As it turned out, students didn't wash their hands between the autopsy and birthing rooms. Semmelweis introduced a simple chlorine wash, but his bosses considered it an insult. Semmelweis went on a bender and ended up in an asylum. He was beaten up and died 2 weeks later. 3. Aristarchus was almost put on trial for suggesting that the Earth orbits the Sun. The ancient Greek astronomer was the first to propose this theory. Most people dismissed it. They continued to believe that everything orbited the Earth. Some individuals insisted that Aristarchus be put in jail for saying otherwise. He managed to avoid prison, yet his work was ignored and forgotten. 4. Ludwig Boltzmann's unrecognized genius drove him to suicide. Boltzmann pioneered statistical thermodynamics. He essentially figured out what allowed the fire to kindle. He also firmly believed in atoms and molecules. Boltzmann's colleagues shamed him for it. They believed that energy, not matter, was what made up the universe. Even people who initially supported Boltzmann turned their backs on him. For Boltzmann, who was bipolar, it was the last straw. In 1906, he hanged himself. 3 years later, another scientist proved the existence of atoms. 5. George Zweig was belittled because of his inexperience. Zweig was a graduate student when he developed the theory of quarks. His rival, Murray Gell-Mann, also studied it. Both of them sent their papers to a journal. Gell-Mann's work was published because he was an older, more respected scientist. Zweig, however, was labeled a charlatan. He became an outcast at his university and later changed his field. Gell-Mann went on to win the Nobel Prize for his studies. To say it was unfair would be an understatement.